Hey everyone, congratulations on the purchase of your new Estate MTN-29ER mountain bike. I think you'll really love this bike to ride. We put a lot of thought into it. It uses modern geometry, so your hardcore mountain biking buddies, you can tell them it's long and slack. It's got 29-inch wheels, so great at rolling over things. And honestly, all-purpose bike. You can ride it on the road, on paths, really on the dirt and on proper mountain bike trails. Of course, at a valued price point that we deliver through Aldi that I think you'll be super happy with. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to put it together, get you up and riding, get you safe on the bike as quickly and easily as possible. All right, when you pull the bike out of the box like this, we're then going to go through how you take it apart and put it together. First thing you want to find is this box. And this box has a few important things inside it. Your instruction manual, which if this video is not good enough, there's more detail in this instruction manual to help you put it together. And you want to find this little bag of tools. We supply with it all the necessary tools. There's 4 or 5 Allen keys in there and a wrench that we're going to use to assemble the bike. Okay, we're going to start the assembly by putting the handlebars in place on the stem here. Then we're going to put the seat in place, pedals and front wheel on. We'll do it in that order because you can tip the bike upside down to put the front wheel on, and you may want to take the front wheel on or off when you're transporting the bike. Following that, we're going to do, I guess, some tips for a bit more advanced riders, and that's including how to adjust the stem height and tension your headset, adjust the gears, some other tweaks to really get the bike riding beautifully. So step one, let's get the handlebar in place. So take our Allen key, we're going to take this front cap off the stem. So just loosen these bolts. Watch they don't fly everywhere and you lose them. Put the cap down, then take our handlebars, sit them in place. You want to have a look and try and get this close to center. And you generally want to line up what's called the rise of the handlebar in line with the forks, but you can adjust that to suit your riding preference. You can roll them back or forwards, which changes the angle of the grips, can make it easier or different feeling on your wrists. Get this front cap in place. Some of these jobs easy to do with 2 people, but you can do it single-handedly, as we'll do here. Just get these bolts started and then we'll tighten it up. You don't need to get this perfectly aligned yet because you can loosen this off and do your fine adjustments afterward. Try to, when you're doing up any of these bolts, like a stem cap like this, you're threading into aluminium. We give recommended torque settings in the manual. Most people don't have a torque wrench though, but we also give some guidelines of what different torque numbers, how that feels, how tight that is. On a bolts like this, they're pretty important because they stop the handlebars moving and rotating forward. So they're pretty tight, but you don't want to use more than a little Allen key like this. If you use a reasonable amount of force using this Allen key, you'll probably get them about right. So snug those up. Make sure you do 1 bolt at a time and go in kind of a cross pattern. So go from the top there down to the bottom on the other side, back up to the top on the same side, and then across again down to here. I'm saying do those up to where you're putting a reasonable amount of force on this Allen key without going crazy, and get that lined up. We're going to adjust the angle of these levers, etc. later. You can see they're nowhere near where they need to be. All right, now we're going to adjust our levers and shifter. We're going to get those somewhere near the position we need to be. These take your Allen key again, adjustment bolt, loosen that, swing it down to, again, it doesn't need to be exact, but somewhere near where you want it to be. Tighten that, but not too tight. You probably adjust that when you sit on the bike. On this side, you've got to adjust both the lever and the shifter. The shifter has the same Allen key adjustment in it. So loosen that off. Loosen off our shifter. Loosen off our lever. I mean, you've got to maybe move that shifter out of the way to get to the bolt. Swing it down into position. And then just tighten it a little at this point. And tighten your shifter also. Again, we'll come back and adjust those to fit the angles that you like when you're riding a bit later in the video. All right, now we're going to fit the seat. Now, note you've got adjustable angle on this seat. There's a bolt underneath the seat post here. Loosen that and you can adjust the angle of the seat, again, for a comfortable position. Tighten it up. You can do it when it's on the bike, no problem. Make sure you do it nice and tight, but it's got serrations there that hold it in place. You've got a quick release on your seat post. The important thing with quick release is they're adjustable for their tightness. You hold the fixed part here and turn the other part clockwise to make it tighter, anti-clockwise to make it looser. You want it reasonably tight. Drop our seat in place. We don't have to, again, be exact with the height at the moment because we get it right, and then shut our quick release. That should feel pretty tight. If it's not tight enough, your seat will move while you're riding, it will twist. So then just use this adjustment, make sure it's nice and tight. All right, we're going to fit our pedals to the bike. Now, the thing with pedals, you've got a right hand and left hand pedal. Right hand pedal has a normal thread called right hand thread. Means you tighten it up by turning it clockwise. Right hand pedal, right hand thread goes in the right hand crank arm as you're sitting on the bike. Left hand thread goes in the other crank arm. If you try to put it in the wrong way, well, you won't be able to, and if you can, you've got a lot of strength and you're going to damage the bike at the end of the day. So we'll put the right hand one in first. I can just take a look at those threads and see this is a normal thread. Try it otherwise. So take it, get it started in the crank arm. Again, should turn in easily. If it feels really tight, you've probably got the wrong pedal. Tighten it up by hand, and then we're going to take our wrench and we're going to do the final tightening. The other thing you know when you're fitting right hand and left hand pedals, you basically always tighten by moving the wrench toward the front of the bike from the top to the front. No matter which side of the bike you're doing, that's the right hand, left hand thread. You don't need to do this super tight. Again, actually pedaling keeps this tight. So just snug it up like nice and firm. Okay, fitting the front wheel. You've got, this is a bolt together front wheel, so nice and safe. It's still pretty easy to remove. You do have to carry a wrench with you. Probably the first time it's easiest, just take the nuts completely off the axle. So undo those, take the washers off. There's a sort of a locking washer here that we'll use in a different way. And then take your front wheel, drop it in place. What you're really paying attention to here is getting this disc rotor inserted into the caliper. So making sure you line that up with the brake caliper so it fits in. Drop the wheel in place. Sometimes you might have to squeeze these fork legs apart a little bit to drop it in place, but it should be nice and firm. We're going to adjust the brake caliper later and show you how to do that in kind of the tips for advanced riders. Once you've got the wheel in place, take your washer, drop your washer on with this little locking tab facing down so it goes into the groove of the fork, and put your nut in place. Thread that up by hand. And then take your wrench and tighten that up. Again, like, you don't need to be crazy tight, but you want that nice and firm. You don't want your front wheel coming off, of course. And then do the other side. All right, now we're going to talk about disc brakes and the adjustment you have. These are mechanical disc brakes, so low maintenance. They're not hydraulic. They don't need bleeding or help from a bike shop. They use a regular cable. You've got your adjustment on the lever, which we'll talk about in a minute, of how to adjust how they feel. But we're going to talk about getting this disc brake rotor running right in the caliper. When I turn this wheel, I can hear a little bit of rubbing on the brake pad. In a perfect world, you want no rubbing, nice and free, so no friction when you're riding. This has got a little bit because this rotor will be slightly out of true, not dead square. You can look down it and you'll probably see that. And you can tweak it a little bit with your hand, bend it this way or bend it against the spokes and play with that to try and get it dead true. The other thing you can do is adjust the caliper and the caliper position. So loosen the two caliper bolts, top and bottom here. Again, make sure you tighten these when you're finished, but loosen these off for the time being. Pull the brake lever and hold it against the rotor. And while you're holding the brake lever, then tighten your caliper. It's going to help to center your caliper over the rotor. I'll do those tight, release it. Still got a little bit of rubbing there, but you can have a play with that front and back to get it really nice and true. Okay, let's talk about adjusting the gears. This bike has Shimano 9-speed gears using the rear derailleur. As cables stretch, as you ride the bike, as chain wears in, etc., this will change. Does require some adjustment to keep the bike running at its best. Very familiar system to any bike shop if you want to have an expert do it, and this is what a bike service typically involves, is adjustment, replacement of cables and gear shifting. I'll show you the basics of how to adjust this. We can do some kind of checks with the bike upside down like this by turning the rear wheel and adjusting through the gears, and we're looking for a clean shift from one gear to the next, right up to the highest gear and back down again. If you find it's not, like, just starting to skip there and you can see it grabbing onto the higher gear, you need a bit of cable adjustment. We've got two adjustments for the cable. We've got this adjustment on the derailleur, turn it clockwise to adjust the cable inward or move the derailleur down, and you've got another adjustment down here on your shifter, and turn this one again to adjust your cable length and change the way it shifts. By adjusting those, and then when you're in a gear where you find it skipping, we've just made a small adjustment there, and you can see we're not skipping anymore. This takes, a bit of trial and error and some continual adjustment probably if you're really serious about your riding and about not having the chain skip from gear to gear. I'm sure there's plenty of other tutorials on YouTube, etc., about how to do this, but the basics are use those two adjustments of your cable, experiment with the bike on the bench or upside down, and then riding, and you'll find it won't take you too long to get it exactly right. Alright, let's talk about fork adjustment on this bike. You've got a suspension fork, coil spring in the left leg and damping in the right. On the left leg, on the top, you've got preload adjustment. Preload is to allow for different weights of rider. There's a measurement called sag when you're sitting on the bike, how much the suspension moves into its travel. As you wind that clockwise, you're increasing the preload. For heavier riders or riders that ride more aggressively, a good idea. And you'll basically stiffen up the suspension a little. On the right hand side, you've got some damping adjustment, which is really a lockout. So the fork moves during normal riding. If you're riding uphill or riding on the road and you want to minimize that fork movement, move your lockout lever all the way clockwise and you effectively turn your suspension fork into a solid fork, which is going to be a little more efficient, soak up a little less energy when you're riding. There is a bit of adjustment in between, right? A full locked out, you call it compression adjustment. You can adjust that, of course, while you're riding on the trail, stop and do it, or even while you're riding if you're competent enough. Alright, we're going to get into a bit more advanced stuff in bike setup and maintenance, and we're going to change the position of our stem and adjust our headset, which happens again as you've been riding the bike for a while, parts wear and they need a little bit of adjustment. Take the little rubber cap off. It's called the compression bolt, and loosen this top bolt. In fact, in this case, we're going to take this right off because we're going to change these spaces here to adjust the height of our stem. So take this one out completely. I'll put that aside, and we're going to loosen our stem bolts, which is these two, and we have helped loosen these before. You want these nice and tight. This is also how you adjust your steering angle to the front wheel. And then you can take this stem off and show your fork steerer. And what we're going to do in this case, we'll take two spaces off, put our stem back on, put those spaces back on top. We've now adjusted our handlebar height down. So depending on the type of riding you're doing, you might prefer that. And now we're going to have to tension the headset. And this is headset adjustment. So I'll do a couple of things at once here. That's this compression bolt that we're tightening. Just make sure I get the right Allen key here. So now that I've got all this system loose, the headset and fork, etc., will move around in this headset. We want to tighten this reasonably tight, pick the front wheel up, turn it. We're feeling for no grinding there. We want a nice smooth action. I'm going to tighten it a bit more. Still feels pretty smooth, just starting to tighten up. That's about right. Make sure our fork is aligned with our handlebars, And now I go and tighten my stem bolts. The stem bolts are what keeps the headset tight, not really the top cap. The top cap's just for tensioning it. So we tighten these up nice and tight and do the other one. And then when you're riding, you should feel no play, no movement in this part of the bike, in this headset. Some people pull the front brake and wobble the bike to feel for it. You can even put your hands there and feel it. That's done through this adjustment. Always loosen this first, adjust this, tighten it back up again to hold it in place. Okay, a few last tweaks before you go for your first ride and some words of how to ride. You probably want to adjust your brake and shifter angles. So loosen this off with your Allen key and then adjust this to a height that feels comfortable. So for me, I like a little bit downward, but some people like them really up or down, no problem. And then cinch that up so it's nice and firm. So you've got adjustment for your brake lever pull with this little adjustment here. So you don't want that to pull all the way to the handlebar when you're really pulling on the brakes tight for an emergency stop. So you turn this outward to make it less lever pull, but set a point that feels comfortable for you, but do make sure that you can stop in a hurry when you need to. At this point when you're on the bike too, you can loosen your front stem bolts and you can adjust the forward or backward roll and make sure your handlebars are centered on the bike. If you find for some reason that from the factory the handlebars aren't centered with the front wheel, you can loosen these two bolts and adjust the centering of your handlebar. Adjust your seat height using your quick release for a nice comfortable position. Tires on this bike, genuine off-road tire, you probably want to start with around 30 psi of pressure. A little bit more if you're riding on really firm dirt or on pavement. You could run up to 40 psi if you want it to roll the fastest. Could run a little bit less if you're a lighter rider and want maximum grip, but you're going to risk getting the occasional flat tire. Of course, it uses a standard 29-inch tube inside the bike. Important things when you go for your first ride, test the brakes, right? Make sure that you can stop. Do it before you even ride. Pull the brakes on, make sure it feels like the brakes are working. On your first ride, ride somewhere where there's no obstacles around, practice your braking, make sure that you can stop the bike. That's the most important thing. If you're not a super confident rider, maybe start with the seat a little bit lower so it's easy for you to put your feet on the ground also when you come to a stop. If you're riding for maximum efficiency, you may then want to adjust the seat up for the most efficient pedaling position. Most of all, enjoy the bike. Hope you love riding it. Any questions, of course, call our customer service line. Hopefully this bike will give you many years of enjoyment, either out and about, on pavement or in the mountains.